Never to sleep with a bad feeling in our hearts, because there's a dark thing that feeds on those feelings. It needs to tenderize the soul by attacking your sanity.
Est-ce que vous pouvez vous présenter, s'il vous plaît?
Hi, my name is Bishal Dutta. I am the writer-director of It Lives Inside. I was born in India, but I live in the US currently. I grew up in Canada as well. I went to school, first of all, at Santa Monica College in Los Angeles, and then I went to UC Berkeley. And I've been making films for as long as I can remember. It's all I've ever wanted to do is make films. And this is my first feature film, It Lives Inside.
C'est votre premier film et vous parlez d'un démon indien. On imagine que vos racines culturelles indiennes, votre lieu de naissance, a joué un rôle là-dedans.
Yes, this movie, the idea for this movie actually came from my grandfather, something that happened to him, where supposedly he saw a young girl once, a family friend, a young girl carrying a jar, an empty jar, and talking to it. And one day he said, there's nothing in your jar. So she opened the jar and threw it at him. Nothing came out, but then he was cursed. And after that, he heard noises in the middle of the night. He heard knocking at his door. Apparently, he left a pack of peanuts out once and something had eaten them. So my grandfather says that he was affected by a curse like you see in the film. And I grew up hearing these stories, and I thought, well, this is something unique. The horror audience, they want to see unique takes on things like demonic possession, and I thought, I want to do that for an American audience. I want to bring, my mythology, the mythology of my own culture, into the language of an American horror film.
En fait, finalement, ce genre de film fantastique vous a donné beaucoup de liberté pour aborder la question des démons dans la culture indienne.
I did have a lot of freedom in terms of bringing this story to life because, to me, there was two parts of the movie. There was the demon, the creature, horror, and that was very much influenced by, let's say, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Conjuring, Poltergeist, some of my favorite films. But there's also the component of this film that is about cultural assimilation and feeling different and feeling outside of a culture. I was an immigrant. I came to North America when I was 4 years old, and so I already had the Indian culture, and assimilating into American culture was a struggle for me. And so I felt that I could do both of those things in one film, convey what that was like, what that experience was like to assimilate into a new culture, and also to deliver a very intense, a brutal, monster horror demon movie. And the freedom really came in conveying the dramatic parts. The family, the internal conflict, the conflict between the friends. These things, I felt a lot of freedom in really exploring what that was like for people in my family and people that I've known, because the horror elements, I knew that even if the audience didn't connect with those elements at the beginning, they would connect with the monster movie part of it. And by the end, I've seen so many audiences connect with the characters and what they're going through, even if they themselves are not Indian. The idea is to do a universal movie, a movie that speaks to everybody. And I think having that horror backbone of this movie really allowed us to do that.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire un peu plus sur l'histoire? Pourquoi on a cette disparition de cette fille, l'amie qui va aller à sa recherche? Pourquoi vous avez voulu mettre cette histoire en place?
The story came from a desire to do, first and foremost, to do a curse film. I love curse movies. One of my favorite curse movies is Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell. I think that's a great one. The Ring is a great one. tradition of that kind of subgenre goes all the way back. Night of the Demon from the 1950s is a great version of this. It's a really robust form in the sense that it always begins with someone being slighted or someone doing a slighting and they get cursed as a result, and there's a character arc built into it. And the disappearance of the friend of Tamira, that really came from this idea that, our main character has cut off her own culture, and the way that we show that in this movie is that she's cut off her best friend. She's cut off her best friend, and the disappearance of the best friend creates a goal for our main character, that she has to get this girl back. And when she gets the girl back, when she gets her friend back, she has overcome her own insecurities and her own fears about her culture, right? So in that sense, that structure just felt right for telling this story because it was great for the characters and their conflicts, but it also spoke so clearly to the actual themes of the film itself.
Est-ce que vous-même, vous avez peur d'être maudit? Et c'est pour ça que vous avez eu besoin d'explorer cette question d'être maudit dans votre premier film?
I think what I find interesting is that for so long, now what we've discovered as mental health crises, for so long we thought those were demonic possessions. We thought those were that a supernatural entity was affecting us in a malicious way, and it manifested as mental illness. And so I think that's where I connect to it in the way that you're talking about, where I feel as though, in a way, what the film is about is depression and loneliness, and these things do feel like curses. Everybody feels them. Sometimes they do feel like curses, and we're wondering, why do I feel this way? What have I done to feel this way and to feel so alone and to feel so distant from everybody? And so I think the idea is to modernize the idea of the curse into, our understanding now of mental health, to say we all can feel cursed sometimes, but can we identify why, and can we solve the problem? That's in this film, our character has a very specific problem, which is that she's running away from her culture, and that's creating this feeling of being cursed. This is a movie of someone who everybody's looking at her. So in a way, she's cursed right at the beginning, even before the monster appears, because everybody's looking at her. The curse is of being seen and looked at all the time. So I think you're absolutely right. There are modern curses that I think we're trying to get into with this film.
Sometimes it seems the horror movies touch themes that are very old, that touch deep into the human cultures from very long times. As you said, cursed fears, they come from very ancient times.
I think what I love about the horror genre is that we're taking emotions that everybody feels, normal, universal emotions, and really conveying how intense those emotions feel. I find that if I take what this film is about and I play it as a drama, I think that the audience watches that from the outside, right? But if I put it in a horror film, then the audience is inside of that emotion, and we're right with our main character. All the stuff that our main character is going through outside of the demon, in real life, it feels so big. And especially when you're a teenager. This is a film about teenagers. When you're a teenager, your emotions feel massive. So when you're afraid, it's terrifying, right? And so, to your point, what I love about what horror film does, and following the tradition even of expressionism, right, is the idea of taking these emotions that have nothing to do with the supernatural, that are common, universal human emotions that we've been feeling since caveman times, right? We've been feeling these things for so long, but to express them in a way that is true to their intensity. They may not be, realistic in a traditional sense, but they're realistic to the tenor of the emotion. So that's how I'd like to use horror films.
En fait, devant le public, vous avez dit justement que les films d'horreur étaient un des meilleurs moyens, si ce n'est pas le meilleur moyen d'exprimer les émotions et de leur donner une intensité. Pouvez nous en dire plus?
Absolutely. I think that horror films are visceral. Right? That is what they need to be at their core. And horror films specifically, that you go into a theater and you sit down and we all experience the most scariest thing possible and we come out alive. Hitchcock said something once that has always stuck with me, this idea that he said, the audience knows it's not real, right? So when you put them in a speeding car and you send them racing to the edge of a cliff, the closer you can get them to the edge of the cliff, the more they'll love you for it. Right? And this is backed up by Tom Gunning wrote this incredible essay called The Cinema of Attractions. And he was talking about what the original purpose of cinema was, beyond the narrative tradition, is attractions, is creating this kind of visceral, spectacular response within the audience. And I think horror cinema is where that tradition still remains, right? And so when I make horror cinema, what I want to do is, first of all, really understand the psychology of the audience, understand how long do I need to hold tension before releasing with a scare, et cetera, those kinds of very technical psychological components of the filmmaking. And then on the other hand, the emotional release, right? I think horror films release so much emotion in a cathartic way. And that's how I'd like to make horror. I want to make very emotional horror films so that you really do feel exhausted by it. But that's what I think the best cinema does, is it exhausts you. It allows you to pour out your emotions. And I think horror is one of the genres where you can be most unrestrained in your, sort of demand of cathartic response from an audience.
Enfin, dans votre film, vous avez matérialisé le monstre. On voit un vrai monstre fabriqué par des artistes. Est-ce que vous aviez besoin pour votre film de voir ce monstre indien?
There's a great push-pull in monster cinema of when do you show the monster and when do you not? And I knew that this film, it was so, even in the writing, was so inspired by Jaws and Alien specifically, that I knew that I wouldn't show a monster for very long. I would use the invisibility, I would use body parts, I would use the covering of, at one point it's behind a shower curtain. I knew I was going to find all these ways not to show you the monster, but I felt deep down that after all of that teasing of the audience, if you didn't see a monster, you'd be disappointed. That's, I think, a big part of monster cinema, is that you don't show it, but then at a point, I think you do have to show it just so that the audience understands the threat is real, right? And I think I really wanted to modernize the ideas of our classical art. This creature, the Pichash, has been drawn before and has been, drawn in the classical art. And I thought, okay, let me take stuff from that. Let me take the eyes, let me take the mouth and the tongue and the teeth. But whereas that is an artistic representation based in the time, right, based in the hundreds of years ago that those artistic representations were made, what would that look like as a real being, as a real animal, as a real creature? So that was really the process of it, was to embody a lot of those ideas, like the hate and the loneliness, to funnel all of that into the design, but always to treat it as a physical monster, as something that works within the rules of physics and the laws of physics, and to present to an audience, this thing could be real. This is what it would really be like if it was in the room with you.
Est-ce que vous avez eu cette idée pour ce monstre où la fille, elle éteint la lumière, on voit les yeux du monstre et quand elle la rallume, le monstre est invisible?
That is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I'm so glad you brought it up. The idea of that, I really wanted to do a rhythm-based scare sequence. And when I say that, I think, for example, I think James Wan is a master of the rhythm-based horror sequence where, the traditional wisdom is, not wisdom, but the traditional method is to build suspense linearly and then hit the audience with a jump scare or something, right? But what I love within James Wan's work is the sort of up and down, the valley, right? And I think that is the scene where the audience most feels as though I'm playing with them, and I love that. That's the scene where I hear the most laughter, usually, and I love that because the audience understands that they're going to get scared. But because they understand that, I keep holding back. I keep saying, okay, you're going to get scared now. No, not yet. You're going to get scared now, not yet. And I think that, to me, is so effective for a horror audience because they know what they're getting. They know why they've come to see the film and they know it's going to happen. But then to have it denied kind of over and over again, I think is so fun. And then when that scare finally does come, it's unexpected because it happens in a long take, right? Without a cut. It happens, she turns the light off and the creature appears over a frame behind her. It's a scene with a lot of cutting, but that specific moment we never cut on. And so it was one of my proudest moments because I thought, how do I frustrate the audience for as long as humanly possible and then give them really like a great payoff to that. So I'm so glad that you like that scene.
Pour comment vous expliquez que les gens aiment se faire peur ou qu'ils aiment voir du sang à l'écran?
You know, I'm very interested in this idea, and I've always been very interested in the idea of like, why do people come to see horror films? What is the evolutionary reason? And I think it still is the same reason as why we told, you know, scary stories by campfires when we were, you know, pre-evolutionary, you know, whatever it is. I think that if you show a child a horror film, if you show a young child like a very gory horror film, it doesn't affect them. They look at people getting cut up and they don't care. They're like, okay, whatever. But the basics of fear, the music, the low rumbles, the darkness and the shadows, that will scare a child. I find that very interesting because I think it's in our innate human nature to be afraid of certain images and certain sounds, right? And there's an evolutionary purpose for it. I think horror films, by their very nature, are designed to remind us as people, as a people, that there are still things to be afraid of in the world. They are cautionary tales, right? And I think that's what I love about horror films ultimately, is that, you know, the more that humanity progresses, we do still need to remember that there are things to be afraid of, that there are things that can lead to our own downfall. It's a little bit of the memento mori sort of thing, whispering for humanity to say, none of us are invincible, you know, that there are forces at work. And, you know, in the case of our film, in the case of It Lives Inside, it's a very specific reason that our main character experiences the horror that she does. This is the product of running away from your culture, right? And so what I love about horror films and why I hope to continue making them is to give the audience real fears to go home to, right? In the way that Jaws did. Jaws made people truly afraid of the water. And I think I would like to introduce new fears for people. And that sounds sadistic, I know, but there is a part of that the more you can scare the audience, the more the catharsis at the end feels good. Because the more real it is for an audience, the fear at the end, when the characters win, when they succeed and they take down the monster, the more cathartic it is for an audience.
Quelles sont vos influences? Comment vous parlez de l'impact de ces influences sur votre travail?
For this film in particular, I think the influence of other films and my personal sort of experience are so tied together. Because when I came to this country, I mean, or when I came to America, I was already in love with films, and I think I used films to understand what it meant to be American. And so for this film, a lot of the influence was coming from really a codified image of what it means to be American from the Amblin films, right? From Poltergeist and E.T. and even the offshoots like Blue Velvet, right? And so I loved those films growing up. And they taught me what it meant to be American. But then I thought, where was my family during those films, right? If you take that idyllic image of the suburbs of Reagan's America, where do I fit into that? And that's a lot of where the film came from. And so you see homages really throughout the film to those films. And I tried to evoke that Rockwellian suburb, but specifically to make the point of, well, here's what the Indian family was doing during all of that. And so those influences are very conscious, right? So the car from Christine, the red car, we tried to put in that. That's a great film set in the suburbs, right? And we made references to all the great horror films, you know, to Poltergeist and Exorcist and all these great films. But for me, it was about, let's consciously evoke those films so that the audience understands, wait, where was this family during Jaws and during Poltergeist and during Nightmare on Elm Street, right? And so I think the pulling from these real movies was in support of really what the film is about.
Alors vous dites que les films d'horreur vous ont aidé à vous intégrer comme Indien aux États-Unis, à aimer la culture américaine, mais en quoi un film comme Freddy, qui a été une inspiration pour ce film, Freddy Krueger, Les Griffes de la Nuit, peut aider un jeune Indien à s'intégrer aux États-Unis?
Part of the integration process for anybody, and for me it started when I was 4, so fairly young, through, you know, pre-teens, teens. Part of it happens because you want to know why something is iconic, right? You want to understand why people are saying certain lines. They're very I'll be back. You're like, why is everybody saying I'll be back in an Austrian accent? And so you start watching the films to understand what was so significant about them. And, you know, Terminator, the first Terminator, was a very important film for me. And I watched it over and over again when I first saw it. And I think, you know, trying to understand a film culturally that is significant like that, you suddenly become so obsessed with all these weird little mannerisms of the characters. And Nightmare on Elm Street has so many great kind of iconic moments. She gets on the phone and it's Freddy and he says, "I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy." You know, there's these iconic moments. And so in that sense, for me, watching these films, I kept pulling, you know, these little moments away from them. And those moments have made it into this film in unconscious ways, right? And so when you're that young and without kind of... I moved around a lot when I was younger. And so without a consistent set of friends, you know, really a lot of the consistency comes from the films by revisiting the films over and over again. And so in that way, I think those films really helped me establish my own identity. I pulled from them those iconic moments, and that helped me understand what it is to be American.
Are you planning on doing a second episode like there has been a second Freddy, so this monster now exists?
It all depends on how many people see this first one, but I would love to do another film in this story. Really what I love about this movie is the characters and these incredible actors that I got to work with. Megan Suri and Mohana Krishnan, Neera Bajwa, Vic Sahay, Betty Gabriel. I would bring all of them back, all of these characters, this family I want to keep following. And but more than that, the idea of leaving the film open at the very end wasn't so much about saying, hey, come back for part 2. That would be nice. But it was about, again, to that point, continuing the story, making the audience understand this isn't over for her. This is something that this family is going to have to fight against forever. So even if there's no part 2, hopefully the audience is leaving imagining what is going to happen to these characters. How are they going to deal with it? That the movie continues to live inside your head. You know what I mean?
Nous allons certainement pas dévoiler la fin, mais elle est incroyable. Mais on espère qu'il y aura une suite. Petit mot encore sur ce festival.
I have had such an incredible time here at Neuchâtel International Fantasy Film Festival. There is such a wide variety of appreciation for genre film here. I'm really stunned by it, and it's so specifically pointed to, you know, that there's the female trouble section, there's all these great sections looking at the breadth of genre cinema. I mean, I love genre cinema, and my goal really with my entire career is to make B movies at the A level, that I always say, and that's what I want to do until I retire, whatever it is. And so to be at this festival and to see such full appreciation for all facets of genre cinema, it's very inspiring, and it makes me want to come here every year for 20, 30 years.
Thank you so much. We just hope to see you come back here in Neuchâtel and see other movies that you wrote or directed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.